Relax and listen to the voice. In the small city of Corral de Progreso in Mexico, there is a beautiful park called the Benito Juarez Park. It is one of the attractions of the city, but it is built near the remains of an old forgotten cemetery, and there are some who say it is haunted. The city wanted to improve the park, so they placed nice benches and seats so that people could enjoy the scenery. They say that disturbed the spirits of the dead and unleashed a deadly curse. Every night, the benches were vandalized, and nobody knew who was causing the damage. To protect the park benches against vandals, the city hired a security guard to patrol the grounds at night. One night when the security guard was on duty, everything seemed normal until midnight, when a dense fog emerged and spread out across the park, and a cold wind began to blow. The guard reported that he heard the cries of a woman. They seemed to be coming from the other side of the park. He then saw a shadowy figure lurking near the park benches. It looked to him like an old woman in a long white dress. Believing that she was up to no good, the guard followed her and saw her breaking and damaging the park benches. When he got closer, he was horrified to see that she had no legs and she was floating above the ground. All of a sudden, the woman attacked him and began to beat him fiercely. He managed to escape, and in the morning, still trembling, he told his boss what he had seen. Soon after this, the security guard was suddenly struck down with a mysterious illness. The doctors couldn't find out what was wrong with him, and a few days later, he died. The city decided to hire another security guard to replace him. The same thing happened to this security guard. One night when the new guard was on patrol, he was confronted by the ghostly old woman. She rushed at him and began beating him furiously as well. Within days, the terrified man became seriously ill, but unlike the previous watchman, he managed to survive and eventually recovered. The doctors still couldn't explain what the mysterious illness was or what had caused it. All that they knew was that it was the same as the disease that killed the previous watchman. The city officials tried to hush it up and keep it out of the newspapers, but eventually word got around, and no one was willing to stand guard at the park at night. The benches were still being vandalized, and the city just had to put up with it and keep repairing the damage. Ever since then, nobody goes near the Benito Juarez at night. They call the ghost the Phantom of the Park, and they say that if you come in contact with the ghost of an old woman, you will be afflicted by a sudden illness that could end up causing your death. According to Mexican folklore, El Cucuy is a small, hideous, hairy creature with glowing red eyes. He has big ears like a bat and a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth like that of a barracuda. The legend has been passed down over the years by word of mouth from mother to child. Mexican parents often warn their children, "Behave yourself or El Cucuy will come and take you away." When night falls, El Cucuy comes. He hides in your closet or under your bed. He can take the shape of any dark shadow. He watches you silently and waits for his moment to pounce, and then he will take you away to his lair, deep in the mountains, and devour you. I grew up in a small town in Mexico. My mother used to tell me ghost stories when I was a child, but none of them scared me as much as El Cucuy. One day, I was angry and I cursed at my mother. She got very quiet and she looked at me with fury burning in her eyes. Slowly and calmly, she said, "El Cucuy te va a raspar los pies en la noche," which means, El Cucuy is going to scratch your feet tonight. Something about the way she said it really scared me. That night, I went to bed, and it took me nearly 2 hours to fall asleep. The next morning when I woke up, I got out of bed, and I noticed that my feet were sore. I looked down, and I saw that both of my feet had long red scratches on them. It truly terrified me, because I didn't know if El Cucuy was real, or if my mother was so crazy that she scratched up my feet while I was asleep to teach me a lesson. In a secluded rural area near Toledo, Mexico, there was a small village where one of the most spooky tales of terror ever told took place. This is the story of a child called Federico, who lived in Mexico in the 19th century. Federico was the seventh son of his family. In fact, he was the seventh son of a seventh son. Everyone in the village said and thought that they knew that the child was endowed with occult powers. They said that he had the gift of second sight and was able to predict the future. It was also said that he had healing hands and was able to cure anyone of any ailment. The boy was quiet and shy, but all the other kids treated him like he was a monster. The villagers were terrified of him and refused to have anything to do with him. One dark night, the elders of the village got together and held a meeting. They discussed what should be done about the boy. They decided that he was so dangerous that they had to get rid of him. They made a pact to murder him and destroy his body because they believed that this was the only way that they could keep the village safe. These men persuaded the boy to come with them and led him to an abandoned and remote shack in the woods. There, when his back was turned, they pounced on him and bound him hand and foot in what is said to be a satanic ritual. They stripped him of his clothes, hung him from the roof, and lowered his body into a huge vat of boiling oil. And then, while he was still alive and screaming in pain, they gouged out his eyes and hacked his body to pieces. They put the chunks of flesh and bone in a wooden barrel and dumped it into the river. The men returned home that night, satisfied that they had accomplished their task. The next day, when some villagers went to visit the house of one of the elders, they knocked on the door, but received no reply. Out of worry, they decided to enter the home, and what they found inside almost made their blood freeze in their veins. The old man lay dead on the ground. His eyeballs were resting on his chest, and his head had been crushed beyond recognition. His hands and his feet had also been chopped off, and there was a macabre message written on the ground in his blood, which read, "Innocent blood has been spilt. Now the guilty must die." After that, all of the elders who had participated in the brutal murder began turning up dead, found with their bodies hideously mutilated and dismembered. When the gruesome and bloody remains of the last man were discovered, the villagers found another message written in blood. This time the message read, "Now I have been avenged. The guilty have paid their debt." According to Mexican folklore, a Lechuza is an old witch, or Bruja, who can turn herself into a monstrous black bird. La Lechuza will prey on people who they think have done them wrong, or they will steal children to use in their occult rituals. Some say that the Lechuza has sold her soul to the devil in order to gain her powers. Usually, the Lechuza will appear as a large bird, the size of a human being. It can also appear as a creature with the body of a bird, but the head of a hideous old woman. They usually only come out at dusk or after nightfall. Many people in Mexico have spotted lechuzas flying high over the tops of houses or have seen it outlined against the moon at night. If the lechuza fixates on you, it will sit outside your door at night, making crying sounds like a baby. If you go outside to investigate, it will swoop down on you and carry you away. If you find unexplained scratches on your door or windowsill, it could mean that a lechuza has visited your house during the night. The following two excerpts were chosen from people who had decided to share their experiences with La Lechuza. When I was a child, my family lived in a little town near the mountains in Mexico. I remember my mom telling me about an old lady that lived nearby. I think she was roughly 60 or 70 years old, and my mom said she was suspected of being a witch and could turn into a lechuza. Apparently, the old woman had done some witchcraft, or as my mother said, brujeria, on my grandma. My grandmother's hair and eyebrows were gone. Some people in town wanted to hurt the lechuza to see if it really was this old lady. One night when they saw the giant black bird, they took out their guns and started shooting at it. One of them shot it in the leg, and they waited and waited, but for days the old lady never left her house. When she eventually came out, she couldn't walk, and she was hobbling around on a cane. The second story is as follows. My family is from Chihuahua, Mexico. My older sister claims she saw a lechuza a few years ago when she went back to visit. They were swimming at a local pond, and they saw an enormous black bird watching them from afar. They started getting a little freaked out, and they decided to go home. The lechuza followed them all the way home while they were driving and stayed outside their house until dawn. My uncles claimed that that night they shot a lechuza, and the next morning they found an old lady lying there dead from gunshot wounds. So either lechuzas are real or my uncles are murderers. There is a haunted house in Monterrey, Mexico, that locals call La Casa de Adamberry, or the House of Adamberry. It has been visited many times by paranormal investigators, and they say that the souls of two women who were brutally murdered there can never rest in peace. Today, the House of Adamberry is very dilapidated and neglected, but many years ago, it was the home of the richest families in Monterrey. In 1933, a man lived there with his wife, Florinda, and their daughter, Antoinetta. Little did the happy family know that the house would soon become the scene of a horrible and vicious crime which was caused by human greed. One morning, the father of the family went to work, leaving his wife and daughter alone in the house. Soon afterwards, 3 men broke in and attacked the 2 women. The burglars thought there was a large chest full of silver coins that was hidden in the house, and they demanded to know the location. These men tortured the wife and the daughter in the dining room and eventually killed them. When the bodies were found, they say it was one of the most horrific, bloody, and cruel crimes ever seen in the area. The housewife and her daughter had been almost completely decapitated. Their heads were hanging on by a thread. The people of Monterrey were shaken and appalled by the brutal murder. The police were faced with a very difficult investigation because there was no sign that the front doors had been forced, and there were no witnesses to the crime apart from the family pet. However, the family pet was a parrot, and it proved to be instrumental in capturing the murderers. While the police were examining the house, the parrot began screeching in Spanish, "No me mates, Gabriel! No me mates, Gabriel!" which means, "Don't kill me, Gabriel! Don't kill me, Gabriel!" They realized that the parrot was repeating the last words of its owner. The police then questioned the father and found out that his nephew's name was Gabriel. They arrested the nephew, and under questioning, he confessed to killing the two women. He told the police that he had planned the robbery along with two brothers who owned a nearby butcher's shop. The three murderers were arrested by the police, who gave them a special brand of justice that was sometimes applied in Mexico many years ago. They called it the law of flight, or the law of escape. The police drove the three criminals out into the desert, then allowed them to escape and shot them in the back as they fled. Their bodies were transported back to Monterrey and put on display so that all the people in the area could see. Ever since that time, the Monterrey House has been plagued by many supernatural events. Many people reported seeing the ghost of the two murdered women lurking in the dining room. Others said that, at night, they could often hear the terrible cries of the mother and daughter pleading with their murderers and screaming, "Don't kill me, Gabriel! Don't kill me, Gabriel!" in Spanish. The main bedroom of the house contains a portrait of the mother, and they say that her face changes and becomes completely disfigured. According to witnesses, a terrible tension can be felt in the house, and until you leave, you'll be followed by the strong smell of sulfur. According to the legend, those who have heard the screams of the two unfortunate women who lost their lives in this place say that their souls will never rest in peace. The story of the House of Aramberry has become famous throughout Mexico over the years, and recently the case got even more attention when a couple of reporters visited the house. They were looking for evidence of a haunting, and when they left, the reporters were involved in a serious car accident. When the recordings that they had made were later reviewed, they could clearly hear distant cries and hollow moans on the tape. The house eventually had to be closed to the public because teenagers would often break in and trespass, hoping to witness some supernatural event. The authorities erected a big wire fence across the front of the house, but the interior is still visible from the street. Some locals say that if you walk past the house at night, you can hear the cries of the souls who are in Pai, and sometimes, if you look in the windows, you can catch a glimpse of the shadowy figures of the ghostly tenants who may never leave. The Chupacabra, or goat sucker, is a scary monster that is believed to drain the blood of its victims. There have been sightings of this creature in Puerto Rico, Nicaragua, Chile, and Mexico. Locals call it El Chupacabras. It has terrorized farms and is allegedly responsible for animal mutilations, killing livestock like goats, cattle, and horses. According to those who have seen it, the Chupacabra has two small arms with a three-fingered clawed hand, two strong, almost reptilian hind legs, again with three claws, and spinal quills down its back, which it uses to fly. This appears to enable it to run quickly and leap over trees. Its head is oval in shape and has an elongated jaw, and it appears to have strong, coarse hair all over its body. The Chupacabra is like some kind of vampire that preys on animals. Farmers claim to have found their animals lying dead on the ground with puncture wounds in their necks and all the blood drained from their bodies. Sightings of Chupacabra continue to be reported in various parts of Puerto Rico and Texas. It has allegedly killed 11 goats in the town of San German, and on one occasion a group of townspeople say they chased the creature away as it was attempting to kill 3 roosters. In Guanica, a 44-year-old man was grabbed from behind by an unidentified creature. He managed to fight the creature off and later received treatments for scratches and cuts on his body. No pictures or videos have been captured of El Chupacabra yet, but some people have seen it in daylight. When villagers in Campo Rico spotted the creature, they chased it into the woods. The mayor then got together an army of volunteers to hunt for it. These volunteers were armed with rifles and had a caged goat to use as bait. However, they failed to catch the legendary goat sucker. Farmers in Calamane, Chile, awoke to find their goats and sheep dead in their pens. The town officials quickly called in the National Guard, and hundreds of armed soldiers undertook a massive search of the area, hunting the Chupacabra. Night patrols, however, found nothing. The Chupacabra is still at large. Since then, the Chupacabra has been blamed in the deaths of over 2,000 animals, ranging from other livestock to household pets. There have even been sightings of the beast in several American cities, including Miami, New York, San Antonio, Cambridge, and San Francisco. Back in the year 1780, a Franciscan priest came to the city of San Luis Potosi in Mexico. He found work as a Latin teacher in one of the best schools of the time and rented a house in one of the most desolate parts of the city called Alfalfa. To help him with his duties, he hired 2 teenage boys who lived in the area. One day, he went on a journey to visit several villages in the surrounding area and brought the boys with him. He was attempting to collect donations for the church. When they all came home, the priest gave the boys orders to unsaddle the horses and put them into their stalls with hay and water. The 2 boys went about their work, and when they were finished, they were very hungry, so they went home for dinner. Meanwhile, the priest was very tired, and after saying his prayers, he went to bed early. When it was night, the boys returned to the priest's house. When they went inside, they were horrified by what they had found. The priest was lying on the floor in a pool of his own blood. It appeared that he had been murdered. The boys fled in terror and ran through the streets, shouting for help. People gathered at the house, and someone had the presence of mind to alert the soldiers and doctors in the nearby military hospital. They confirmed that what the boys were saying was true. The priest had indeed been brutally murdered. The city authorities immediately took on the task of investigating what happened to the poor man. They searched every corner of the city and surrounding towns looking for suspects. They arrested several people, but without any evidence against them, the people were released. One official at the police station was suspicious of the 2 boys and had them arrested. He placed them in separate rooms at the military hospital and began a harsh interrogation. Under such intense pressure, the boys started blaming each other. The younger boy said that the older one had killed the priest to steal the money that he had collected from the villages. The authorities took the boys back to the priest's house, where they recovered the money and the murder weapon, which was a bloody dagger. The boys were put on trial and found guilty. The judge sentenced them to be executed. They were hung by the neck until they were dead, and then their hands were cut off. The severed hands of the two teenage boys were hung on the wall in the gloomy alley outside of the priest's house as a warning to others. Ever since then, the sad and lonely alleyway has been known as the Alley of the Hands. People were afraid to pass through it. Whenever they had to go down this alley, they made the sign of the cross and said a prayer. They didn't stop praying until they came out on the other side. After a while, the severed hands were taken down and buried, but a few days later, they were back, hanging on the wall again. Whenever anyone tried to remove them, they would just keep reappearing on the wall. This went on for years until the entire district was renovated and the alley was demolished and turned into a wide street. They say that if you go to the place where the gloomy alley once stood, on some nights in November, you will see the skeletal hands floating above you. You might also catch a glimpse of the ghost of the priest disappearing around the corner. La Mala Hora, roughly translated to the evil hour or the evil one, also known as La Malorga or the evildoer. La Mala Hora is said to be a wicked spirit or an evil demon that wanders the lonely country roads after midnight and terrorizes those who travel alone. It usually lurks in the darkness at a crossroads, waiting for an unwary traveler to cross its path. According to some, it is more feared than the devil itself. It first appears as a large black lump, constantly moving and changing shape. It can also change size rapidly, growing larger and smaller. They say that it looks like a ghostly black shroud or a large black cotton ball. Anyone who is unfortunate enough to set eyes on this demon runs the risk of being driven insane. It tries to hypnotize and paralyze anyone who happens to encounter it at night. When it attacks, it suddenly rushes towards the unwary, envelops him, and suffocates him. The following morning, the poor wretch is found dead at the side of the road. At other times, it transforms into a wicked woman, a female personification of evil. This woman appears wearing black clothing, her hair long and unkempt. She's like a spirit or wind floating along without touching the ground with her feet. People in New Mexico say that she seldom appears in human form, but when she does, it is considered to be a death omen. If you encounter her at a crossroads, it usually means that you or someone you know is going to die. When pressed for more detailed information about this demon, the people of New Mexico will likely refuse to talk about it and just reply, "Es cosa mala," which means, "It is an evil thing." In one story, there was a woman whose husband was away on business. One night she decided to go stay with her friend in Santa Fe. It was just after midnight when she left her house and drove down the lonely, deserted highway. After a while, she approached a small crossroads when suddenly a dark shape appeared in front of her car. The woman screamed in fright and slammed on the brakes, screeching to a halt. When she looked up again, the dark shape had disappeared. For a second, the woman breathed a sigh of relief. Then she turned to her right and saw something that almost gave her a heart attack. Right beside her window, looking in at her, was a hideous old lady. She had the twisted face of a demon, glowing red eyes, and short, sharp, pointed teeth. The demonic lady began clawing at the window, trying to break the glass. Terrified, the woman put her foot down on the accelerator and the car took off down the road. For a few terrible moments, the demonic lady ran alongside of the car, still clawing at the window, and then the car gained enough speed that the old woman finally fell behind. The driver looked into her rearview mirror, and the last thing she saw was the demon growing taller and taller until it was as large as a tree. When the woman finally reached her friend's house, she ran inside and locked the door behind her. The woman explained to her friend what she had seen at the crossroads, and her friend gasped in horror. "It must have been the Mala Hora," said her friend. "The evil one. They say she only appears at a crossroads when someone is about to die." The woman who had experienced this encounter was overcome by a feeling of dread and impending doom. She couldn't sleep at all that night. She waited until morning, and then she drove home. She made sure not to drive by the crossroads again, fearing that the demonic lady would appear once more. When the woman finally reached home, she found a police car waiting in her driveway. Once she parked, the officers approached her, asked her name, and then delivered some terrible news. Her husband had been mugged on the way back to his hotel the night before. He had been shot in the head and was killed instantly. According to the police, this happened just after midnight. This is the story of the House of Tubes, or La Casa de los Tubos. In Monterrey, Mexico, there's a very famous legend about an abandoned building called the House of Tubes. This strange structure was built in the 1970s, but was never inhabited. The House of Tubes has a very unique architecture. From the outside, it looks like a set of gray concrete tubes standing on end. On the inside, the hallways are cylindrical in shape. On one side of the building, a series of ramps lead to the upper floors, and on the other side, the levels are connected by a large set of stairs. According to the legend, the house was built by a wealthy couple who had a daughter who was paralyzed. The father wanted to create a special house that was custom-made for disabled people. It was designed with ramps leading from one floor to another to allow her to move freely around the house in her wheelchair. The man hoped it would give his daughter the feeling that she wasn't disabled at all. When construction began, the young girl seemed really excited about the new home her family would be living in. She asked her father to take her to see the building. On the day that the girl went to see the house, two of the architects who designed it suffered a terrible accident and were killed by falling concrete. After this, the construction crew refused to continue working on the house. The family managed to hire another group of builders to finish the house, and the girl wanted to go back to check on them. She was testing out the ramps, going up and down from one floor to the next. Her parents took their eyes off of her for just a moment, and her wheelchair suddenly started to slide backwards down the ramp. The girl was unable to stop herself, and her wheelchair came hurtling down the ramp, going much too fast. The poor girl went flying down the ramp, smashed into a wall, and went flying out the open window and fell to her death. Her grieving parents couldn't bear the thought of living in the property that had caused their daughter's death, so all construction was immediately stopped, never to resume again. Many years later, the half-finished building was put up for sale on the market, but not a lot of buyers were interested. One wealthy family went to see the House of Tubes and brought their young son with them. While the parents surveyed the lower levels, the boy went upstairs alone to explore. A few minutes later, they heard their son screaming. When they looked up, they saw him struggling with a little girl. As they watched in horror, the girl grabbed their son and threw him out of the window. The boy landed on the ground below with a sickening thud. The young girl was nowhere to be found. After this terrible tragedy, the authorities fenced off the land and it was no longer available to the public. They say that the house is cursed and it's haunted by the ghosts of the 2 children who died there. It's said that at night, the horrible sound of a young girl weeping can be heard, and the ghostly apparition of a young boy has been spotted playing in the entrance. Some people claim to have seen a young girl standing at the open window on one of the upper floors and waving at passers-by. My mother told me this story once, and my grandmother told me that she lived through it. In the early 1960s, there was a small town in Mexico where a lot of babies just happened to be born around the same time. It is said that there was a woman who haunted the town. She was not a ghost. She was one of the 200 people that lived in the town at the time. People said that she was a witch, a worshiper of the devil, and many people said that she would go out into the fields in the middle of the night when everyone was asleep. Some local farmers claimed that they would see her whenever they would go outside to check on their animals because their animals would make a lot of noise whenever she passed by. They could never tell who it was because it was always pitch black and they couldn't see a thing. It was a poor town with only a couple of streetlights. People weren't so worried about her for a while because they saw that she did no harm to them. That was until something terrible happened. One night, a married couple slept with their baby between them. They were so poor that they couldn't afford a mattress and had a carpet as their bed. The parents did not sleep too close to their baby because they were afraid that they would accidentally roll over and hurt their child. The mother and the father were deep into their sleep until the mother heard the baby cry terribly. The baby shrieked a blood-curdling scream, loud enough to wake up my grandmother and grandfather who lived next door to the couple. The baby cried and the mother woke up and tried to put him back to sleep. Whenever the mother fell asleep again, she heard the baby cry once more. And with this, she woke up again and did just the same as before. This went on about 3 or 4 times. The mother began to become angry and impatient with her baby because she was really tired. The father was asleep and would not wake up no matter how many times his baby cried. The 5th time that the baby cried, the mother ignored it. The baby cried for another couple of minutes, and the mother continued to ignore her baby until she subconsciously heard someone walking outside. She heard the door squeak open slowly, and then it shut loudly. The door was made of thick metal, so the loud sound terrified her and finally woke her and her husband up as well. When she looked for her baby, she saw that he was quiet and thought that he was sleeping. The mother asked the husband why he wouldn't wake up before, and he said that he had never heard anything. When the mother went to hold her baby, she saw that he was cold. She shook her baby and she kissed her baby to try and wake him up, but the baby would not wake. The baby was dead. When the mother took off the baby's blanket, she saw that his stomach and arms had scratch marks. Someone had been hurting her child while he was sleeping. Then her husband cried, La Bruja lo mato a mi hijo. The husband was screaming, the witch killed him. She killed my son. The mother swore that she heard a woman giggling. After that, many parents held their children close to them whenever they slept. Sometimes children would cry in the middle of the night out of nowhere, and their mothers would begin to pray. The children who could speak said that they would feel someone grabbing them, and then apparently this witch would leave afterwards. It wasn't until years later that 2 children died, a brother and a sister, except it was in a river in the town. One man swore that he saw a woman pushing the boy and the girl's head down into the water and laughing as she did so. He yelled at the woman to leave them alone, and he ran to stop her. She kept laughing, looking at him and laughing at him, and was singing as he ran towards her. But when he almost reached her, she was gone, and the bodies of the boy and girl were floating on the water. People began to suspect women who could be the witch, but coincidentally, many people left the town around that time to move to other places. And according to theory, the woman who was the witch could have been one of those who had moved. They say that in Mexico, there's a scarlet red car that travels at night on the road between Mexico City and Cuernavaca. Usually, it's only seen by men who wander the lonely streets after dark. They call it El Carro de las Brujas, or the Carriage of the Witches. Inside the red car, there are 2 or 3 women. Sometimes there are as many as 5, and allegedly they are all very beautiful. When they see a man alone by the side of the road, they stop the car and try to entice him to get inside. They use sensual language, gestures, and promise that they will fulfill his dreams. If the man accepts their offer and gets into the red car, he is usually found sometime later lying lifeless by the side of the road, his bruised and battered body covered with cuts and strange arcane symbols. By this, it is obvious that he has been subjected to some dark occult ritual in which he has been sacrificed to the devil. Some say that the scarlet lining of the red car is made from the blood of the victims. I'm currently sitting in front of my computer, scared witless. Every moment could be my last. My friend is here with me, and he is the sole reason why my life is in danger. This may not make sense at first, but let me explain. It all started earlier today, when a friend of mine burst into my house and slammed the door behind him. His eyes were wide with fear, and he stood there with his back against the door, breathing heavily. This frightened me, and I asked him what had happened, and he told me this story. He had been living with his aunt for the past year because his parents were in Mexico. They were doing mission work at a small hospital in southern Mexico. The previous night, a bedraggled man had stumbled through the entrance of the hospital. He was screaming in Spanish and appeared to be out of his mind with terror. They brought him over to a chair and let him sit down. As he caught his breath, he told his story in broken English. He claimed that his sister had been killed by something he referred to as La Muerte Blanco, and he kept saying that it was coming for him next. Confused, they asked him who or what Muerto Blanco was. With a look of unfathomable fear on his face, he said that La Muerto Blanco was the White Death. He explained that she is the soul of a girl who died years ago. She died by her own hand, he said, alone and unloved. She hated life so much that she wanted to remove all traces of herself from the earth. So great was her desire to completely obliterate her memory that she returned from the dead as a vengeful spirit bent on killing all those who knew of her existence. She is a girl, but not a girl, he said. She's not dead, but not really alive. She has cold black eyes that weep blood, and she walks without ever actually seeming to move an inch. She stalks her victims like a wild animal, pursuing them across rivers and valleys, trailing them back to their homes. You're never even really aware that she is following you until you hear her telltale knock upon your door. She knocks once for your skin, which she'll use to patch her own decaying flesh, twice for your hair, which she'll gnash between her teeth, 3 times for your bones, which she'll fashion into clubs, 4 times for your heart, which she'll tear out of your chest, 5 times for your teeth, which she'll polish and keep in a box, 6 times for your eyes, which she'll pluck out one by one, and a 7th time for your soul, which she'll swallow whole. No matter where you go, the White Death will track you down, and you will hear her terrible knocking begin on the door. You can try to outrun her, but she's faster than any mortal man. If you flee from your home while she's knocking on your door, she'll just follow you wherever you go. The terrified man was certain that this thing had killed his sister. He said that he had tried to tell the police about the White Death, but they would not listen, just dismissing it as an old wives' tale. After that, he tried to tell his priest, but the priest immediately shut the door of the church in his face and turned him away. The priest had seen the White Death following him, he said, and did not want to get involved. With his head in his hands, the frightened man said that the White Death follows you forever until you tell someone else about it. Then it strikes. It kills you and begins following the person you told. After finishing his tale, the man stole a car from the Mission Hospital parking lot and vanished into the night. Apparently, my friend's mother and father had immediately called his aunt and told her about the strange man that they'd encountered. They asked her if she had ever heard of the White Death. She said that she had not, and they proceeded to tell her the story that the man had told them. The aunt received a phone call later that night. The call was from the Mexican police. They told her that the boy's parents had been found dead outside the hospital and that they had been torn apart. My friend's aunt had immediately called him at school to break the bad news to him. As she cried, she told him she couldn't understand what had happened. She recounted the whole story to him, telling him about the strange man who had turned up in the hospital just hours before his parents were found dead. She told him how the man had given his parents a weird and disturbing story about something called the White Death. When he hung up the phone, he had struggled to come to terms with what had happened. It almost didn't seem real to him. When he got home after school, he found the front door of his aunt's house standing open. Inside was a trail of blood leading into the kitchen, and there, upon the kitchen floor, he found his aunt's dead body. She had been torn limb from limb. He ran out of the house and all the way across town, never looking back until he reached my house. As he told me this story, I could hardly believe it. Within the space of one day, his mother, his father, and his aunt had been murdered. It all just seemed too far-fetched to me. But before I could utter a word, my friend and I both recoiled in horror as we heard a knocking begin at my front door. We've been staring at the door for over an hour now, neither of us wanting to open it. The knocking is still going on, growing louder and louder. She never gives up. She never quits. La Muerte Blanco is unstoppable. I think she wants to scare us, my friend and I. I think she wants us to blame each other. And I do. I blame my friend. It's all his fault. He should never have told me about her. As I sit here in my house beside my friend, both of us listening to that hideous knocking growing ever louder, I wish a lot of things. I wish he had killed my friend before he reached my house. If he had never been able to tell me about her, I wouldn't be in danger now. I'm sorry I ever met him. And I'm sorry for you. I'm sorry I told you this story. I'm sorry that I ever told you about La Muerte Blanco, the White Death. Because now that you know about her, she'll be coming for you next. Thank you all for listening to these stories. We hope that you've enjoyed these urban legends from Mexico. Take care of yourselves out there, and when you go to sleep, have sweet dreams.